Hello, everybody.
Oh.
So we've just got some people joining for the moment. So I'd like to welcome you to our webinar on China's CSAR quality compliance requirements for imported cosmetics. I'm Victoria Caldy, and I'm Business Development and Marketing Director at Cisema.
I'm Hamish King, by the way. I'm here as well. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Cisema. Victoria is going to take us into the detail for today. I'm just also going to be here in case of questions, and I'll be monitoring as well and can jump in to supplement anything additional in case I can help Victoria.
Great. Thanks, Hamish. Just a note about us. We are a leading provider of regulatory affairs, quality assurance, clinical research, product testing and safety certification services for China and Hong Kong. And we have over 20 years experience. We specialize in medical devices, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, which is obviously the topic for today, health foods, but also industrial and consumer products. And there's some more information about what makes us different and the fact that we have about 100 employees worldwide with 12 offices, 6 of which are in Hong Kong and China. So today we're going to be looking at China's CSAR and the new regulatory framework for cosmetic quality systems for imported products. But before we get into the webinar, I'd like to say that it is a jam-packed session, so I'll be talking for just less than an hour. If we have no time to answer questions, I'm happy to answer them afterwards, so please do email them through to me, and you'll find my email address on the last slide today. Also, if you'd like an attendance certificate, a copy of the slides or a copy of the recording, again, please do email us and we can send those through to you. Also, I'd like to say that I did present on this topic for the French Beauty Association last October in Paris. However, some of the content has been updated to take account of the changes that have taken place since then. So just in the last couple of months, there's been quite a few changes and some are coming up. So what will we be covering today? So the NMPA specifications for quality management of cosmetics production, the QMS documentation requirements, quality safety responsibilities, the quality requirements for the NMPA online account, registration filing, as well as annual reporting, the safety and technical standards. We'll have a quick look at a case study about infringements that have led to the suspension of production, adverse reaction monitoring, inspections and customs clearance, as well as an action plan of what you can do next. So first up is understanding the new regulatory framework. The cosmetics sector in China has been and continues to be more and more regulated, just as with the food, drug and medical device sectors. Now, today's title is obviously the CSAR and quality requirements, but we need to look back a little bit further than the CSAR to fully understand the quality requirements for imported products. So back in December 2016, the cosmetic safety and technical standards were first implemented. And they're important to know if your product meets safety standards for the registration and filing. Then in January 2017, the cosmetics manufacturing and distribution rules were introduced. Now they cover production licenses and they have since been updated by measures on cosmetic manufacturing and operation in January of last year. Then of course the famous CSAR, the Cosmetics Supervision and Administration Regulation. That came into force just 2 years ago on the 1st of January 2021. And this introduced specific requirements for good manufacturing practices. And obviously cascading down from the CSAR, there is various legislation of which we're talking the main points today. There are specific provisions on children's cosmetics introduced in October 21. We've already mentioned the measures on cosmetic manufacturing and operation. Last year also saw the introduction of measures on cosmetic labeling, which have important implications to make sure your label is correct for being imported into China. Obviously, the good manufacturing practice requirements, which are an integral part of today's presentation, they came into effect on the 1st of July last year, and there is a grace period for some infrastructure changes until this year, but they are enforceable as of the last 6 months. Then to help the GMP, there has been a list of GMP inspection points and judgment principles that came into force just last month on the 1st of December. Then the next piece of legislation for quality and safety are the measures and management and monitoring of cosmetic adverse reactions. This came into effect in October last year, and it has already seen some cascading guidelines. They are currently in draft form on how to collect and report these adverse reactions, and we'll be taking a look at that today as well. And then there are two upcoming legislations for this year which come into effect on the 1st of March. These are the measures for quality and safety responsibility, as well as the measures on sampling inspection of cosmetics. And we're going to take a look at both of these as well. And of course, there are various other rules and measures and guidelines that are either in draft form or have been announced for the future. Especially here, you can see that there are management standards for cosmetics overseas inspections. There's a draft form. So the fact that this legislation is already tabled shows that the NMPA is expecting to be conducting overseas inspections. So that gives you an overview of all of the legislation that is pretty much impacting quality and safety of cosmetics for China. So the details can be found in the Good Manufacturing Practice for cosmetics, as well as the measures for quality and safety responsibility. So we're going to take a look at that now. So the GMP applies to cosmetic products. And although it doesn't specifically mention ingredients per se, ingredients are actually covered under the materials and product management requirements. So the GMP does apply to finished as well as semi-finished products as well as ingredients. But of course, one of the most frequently asked questions is, who do the GMP requirements apply to? Well, they apply to cosmetics registrants and filers who manufacture their own product, cosmetic registrants and filers who outsource, or in the NMPA's terms, entrust the manufacture to the third parties or even companies within their own corporate group. And this entrusted or outsourced manufacturer as well. So you can see it covers registrants and filers. So just to distinguish, a registrant for a special cosmetic and a filer for a general cosmetic. So you can actually ask the question, does the GMP apply to overseas manufacturers and overseas registrants and filers? Well, to be able to answer this question, we need to actually look at the drafts. When we take a look at the first draft, you can see that there was no specific geography mentioned within the first draft. In the second draft, there seems to have been a deliberate change not to specify the People's Republic of China. Then, in the final version, which came into force last July, again, there's been a deliberate change to not specify the geographic scope, which seems to suggest that the GMP applies equally to registrants and filers and outsourced manufacturers, both in China as well as overseas. And then there are three additional reasons why we believe that it does apply overseas. Is first of all, when you look at what's happened in other sectors, such as drugs and medical devices, where the GMPs in those sectors apply to manufacturers overseas. Secondly, is the fact that the CSAR itself applies broadly to both registrant and filers and outsourced manufacturers, both inside and outside of China. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, the management standards for cosmetics overseas inspections is an upcoming piece of legislation. But it raises another question. If both registrant filers and outsourced manufacturers fall within the scope of the GMP, who has ultimate responsibility? Well, both the GMP and the new measures for quality and safety responsibility that come into force on the 1st of March state that the registrant and filer is ultimately responsible for the quality, safety, and efficacy of the product. They are responsible for what is released on the market, so if there is an issue, it is the registrant or filer who stands in front of the NMPA for enforcement of the rules and regulations. And because you have this ultimate responsibility for quality, you need to have your own quality system. So a registrant and filer can't just hold a certificate to distribute or sell a product in China, but really they have to have the staff and the knowledge about the cosmetic manufacturing process and the technical requirements of the product. Basically, you also have to have capacity in terms of personnel, facilities and systems to be able to supervise any outsourced manufacturer. Now, there are pretty much 7 main areas of the GMP, which require changes potentially to infrastructure, but mainly they are procedural in nature or they require changes in personnel. So the main provisions of the GMP relate to departments and staff, and this includes the need to have a designated person in charge of quality and safety, and we'll have a look at this. Quality assurance and control. The GMP sets out that companies have to have a quality and safety responsibility as well as self-inspection systems, and that you're proactively conducting internal audits. Plant facilities and equipment management, so that production areas are divided into clean, quasi-clean and general production areas, that you have water and air purification systems. And for domestic manufacturers, at least, there's a deadline of July the 1st to be able to introduce these infrastructure changes, and that's this year. There's also requirements for materials and product management, where you have a full traceability system for batch number management rules as well as production process management. For example, using inner packaging materials, before you use those, you should clean and disinfect, as well as rules regarding entrusted production management, and that the entrusting party is the registrant and filer, and that if you use a contract manufacturer that they are located in China, that they have a production license that is valid for the products that they are producing. And finally, product sales management is also covered, that you have to have a product recall management system, and that any recall products are clearly marked, stored separately, or even destroyed if need be. So what does it mean in terms of systems and documentation that you need to set up and adapt? Obviously, you need to have everything in place as regards manuals, quality policies, objectives, management systems and standards, production process procedures, etc. But the GMP goes much further in listing the type of documentation, and the GMP states this as, translates as systems, but perhaps we could really understand this as to be procedures that need to be established. And in fact, there are 33 of them in total to be able to meet the full requirements of the GMP. But we're just going to take a look at 8 of the most important ones that will form the focus of an inspection by the NMPA. First of all, you need to have a quality and safety responsibility system. You need to have a quality management self-inspection system, and that you do a self-inspection every year, and that reports should be kept for no less than 2 years. It also calls for cosmetic manufacturers to have in-house laboratories. It calls for companies to establish a sample retention management system with a retention period of not less than 6 months after the expiry date of the product, as well as implementing a record system and inspection of incoming materials. And this should include acceptance procedures and standards and methods, as well as keeping samples of key raw materials. Should also have a label management system to review and confirm product labels before shipment, as well as a product sales record system to ensure shipped goods are the same as those that you have on record. And finally, that the adverse reaction monitoring and evaluation system, we're going to take a look at this later, and also a product recall system, so that distributors are informed to stop sales as well as customers to stop using the product. And of course, there is a linking element throughout this, is the traceability management system. So this should be able to trace all raw materials, quality control, storage, sales, and recall for each batch of products. Obviously, it's not an exhaustive list, as I've said, because there are 33 systems or procedures that you need to introduce. And there's also ones regarding electronic record keeping that can be found in Appendix 1 of the GMP. So there are these provisions in terms of manufacturing, but there are also very specific provisions for contracting out your manufacturing. So here it means that the entrusting party has to be the registrant and filer. So the company who is actually registering and filing the end product, and that they must set up an entrustment quality agreement. And it has to indicate the scope and period of the agreement, as well as the responsibilities of each party. And the equality agreement must set out the communication and supervision mechanisms and the key contacts of both parties and the rights of the registrant and filer to audit the entrusted manufacturer. Now, in the drug and medical device spaces, there's even a quality agreement that's been issued by the NMPA, as well as guidelines as to what the equality agreement contains. So we may see this as well in cosmetics in the future. And basically, the registrant and filer has to have a direct relationship that's supported by documentation. And it's a big focus for inspections for the NMPA. They're looking for documentary evidence about how you communicate, through what channels, and how do you supervise the contract manufacturer. So you must have a supervision system and the ability to assess the entrusted manufacturer. So the NMPA will look to see that you have documentation, that you have instructed the manufacturer, that you've conducted training, and that there is communication between you and the outsourced manufacturer. And that also you have sufficient capacity in terms of staff to answer questions from the outsourced manufacturer. You also need to have a replacement system in case there are issues with the outsourced manufacturer, that you can either replace them or at least solve the issues with the interested manufacturer, as well as a product release management system. This is a critical item in the GMP. As you can see here, there are 2 asterisks, and we'll see that a little later when we look at the GMP inspection list. But the NMPA expects the registrant and filer to manage the product release onto the market. It has to be based on documentation that's been generated from your outsourced manufacturer through their ex-factory inspections. And of course, there's also requirements for sample retention, as well as a record management system of what's coming from the entrusted manufacturer. Again, it's not exhaustive, but it is mainly what the NMPA inspectors would want to see. Next, we're going to look at the recently released legislation that lays out the responsibilities for quality and safety. So the measures for quality and safety responsibility have just been released and come into force on the 1st of March. The final version of the legislation is largely unchanged from the draft version that was proposed for industry comment at the end of 2022. And it lays out some key provisions, namely that the person responsible for quality and safety efficacy is indeed the registrant and filer. So we've already seen that in the GMP, and it's backed up here. But here it specifies that you are responsible throughout the whole process. So from research and development through production, as well as operation, and that means distribution, marketing, and sales. So the registrant and filer has full responsibility over the full chain. In terms of other requirements, you must have a quality and safety responsibility system that clearly clarifies the positions and duties of key personnel, such as your legal representative, your quality and safety manager, a quality assurance manager, production manager, and any other positions related to quality. Indeed, the legal representative is fully responsible for quality and safety of cosmetics. Now, if they've entrusted the management of the company to somebody else, then the quality and safety can also be entrusted as long as they supervise this person's performance on their behalf, that they are performing their duties correctly. The measures also talk about a person in charge of quality and safety. Now, the NMPA talks about a person in charge rather than a vice president, director, or manager, so that the notion is covered no matter the size of the company. but we're going to use the term manager during this presentation just to make sure it's easier to follow. There's also rules on NMPA inspection, and filers and registrants and entrusted manufacturers will be inspected to make sure that they have implemented a cosmetics quality safety responsibility system. They will also be inspecting the duties performed by the quality safety manager, as well as the fact that you have implemented risk prevention and control. And finally, a new article was introduced in the final version to state that the domestic responsible person shall bear corresponding responsibility for the quality and safety of cosmetics. So this is an important point when you're looking at the contract that you have with your domestic responsible person in China who is representing you, to make sure that they have staff that are qualified to be able to perform this role. So we saw earlier that the GMP had provisions for a quality safety manager, but these measures state specifically that the QSM must have professional knowledge related to the quality and safety of cosmetics, such as cosmetics, chemistry, chemical industry, biology, medicine, pharmacy, food, public health or law. They must also have 5 years experience in cosmetics production or quality management, as well as 40 hours of training or learning per year. The new measures also list out specific duties that the quality and safety manager must perform, and the fact that the NMPA will be conducting random assessments and inspections to check that the QSM is actually able to perform their duties accordingly. And they're also looking for companies to be undertaking their own internal ability assessments of the QSM. The measures also list out sanctions if you do not have a quality safety manager, or if the quality safety manager doesn't meet the prescribed employment requirements that I've mentioned above, or doesn't have the ability to perform their duties. So these sanctions can involve fines, seizure of raw materials and goods, suspension of production and business, revoking of cosmetics licenses if you're in China, as well as potential bans of up to 5 years on cosmetics production and business activities. So this would basically impact imports into China. But obviously, it doesn't stop at just appointing a quality safety manager. There are also health examination requirements that come out of the GMP. So in Article 11 of the GMP, there is a requirement for health exams for all personnel in direct contact with cosmetics. It involves a pre-employment and annual health exam, and for health files to be maintained for 3 years. Now, obviously, how to apply these to overseas manufacturers, particularly with privacy laws, is going to be interesting to see. But what the NMPA is expecting to see, at least for manufacturers in China, is past medical history, physical exams such as heart, lung, liver, spleen, liver function test, microbiological exams for dysentery and typhoid, chest x-rays, and also visual acuity and colour differentiation, especially for those staff involved in quality inspection, acceptance and maintenance. So as you can see, there are quite a lot of requirements in terms of for quality and safety personnel. So we've looked at those GMP and quality and safety responsibilities, but there are other quality requirements under the CSAR which apply to, for example, the online account creation, as well as registration and filing, and also annual reporting. Let's have a look at those now. So there is a long list of documentation such as business licenses, power of attorneys, etc., to open an online account in order to file or register cosmetics. But there are certain documents you have to submit for quality as well. So as an overseas registrant and filer, you're required to submit an overview of your adverse reaction monitoring and evaluation system, as well as of your quality management system, as well as your CV or resume and ID type and ID number, so for example, passport and passport number, of your quality and safety manager, which is why it has to be a very specifically named person within your system. And if the production is entrusted to another manufacturer, they also have to submit these elements. In order to maintain the account and the registrations and filings that you have with the NMPA, there is a new requirement from January last year that all general cosmetics that have been filed for a year should submit an annual report. And we'll take a look at this now. And there's also a requirement to submit raw material product safety information. But just a quick word on annual reporting. As I've said, it only applies to general cosmetics because special cosmetics submit this information as part of their renewal application dossier every 5 years. So a registrant and filer must submit a report, but really it involves entering information into an online system, which you can see here on the screen. There are plans to improve the platform in the future, so we need to watch this space. The filing period is from January the 1st to March 31st every year for the previous calendar year. And this is obviously a separate requirement from submitting any cosmetic adverse reaction reports that we're going to look at in a little while. The report should contain an overview of your production and importation of products, as well as any information if you've had a suspended production, for example, and also information on your self-inspection that may lead to highlighting adverse reactions. So in terms of registration and filing of your end product, from the 1st of January last year, so it's been in place now a year, ingredient safety information should be submitted for raw materials that have antiseptic, sun protection, hair coloring, freckle removal, and whitening functions. Now, this safety ingredient information can be supplied via Annex 14 form, or it can be done via the new cosmetic ingredient code that was introduced by the NMPA at the same time. And this is obtained from your ingredient supplier, who gets the code by registering with the NMPA directly. There's also a requirement to submit a simplified product safety assessment report. Now, this differs slightly from the ingredient safety information as it contains the product as a whole. So it's bringing in the packaging as well. Now, from January of this year, the ingredient safety information must now be submitted for all raw materials. So it's no longer just restrictive to the hair coloring, freckle removal, etc. It's all raw materials for all new registrations and filings from now on. But if any products were actually registered before the 1st of January, you have a grace period of 4 months until the 1st of May to submit the ingredient safety information for those products. So there is now a 3-month window to be able to submit that ingredient safety information. Then finally, in May 2024, full versions of product safety assessment report will be required as part of filings or registrations. But how do you know if your product and ingredients meet the safety requirements for China? Well, you need to refer to the safety and technical standards for cosmetics. This is an important regulation for supervising cosmetics in China, and also for the sample inspections we'll have a look at to make sure that cosmetic safety surveillance is undertaken correctly. So these standards were first released in 2015, and they've been revised 8 times, and the latest draft version was issued last year. Now, the primary changes in the latest draft were to revise and improve terms and definitions of what is a prohibited raw material, sunscreen, hair dyes, rinse-off cosmetics, eye cosmetics, and safety risk substances. It also reintroduced some standardized names, so for example, hemp seed oil or marigold flower extract. Some raw materials have been added or deleted from the list. And there is also some additional examination methods, such as physical, chemical, toxicological, and human efficacy evaluation tests. And as an example of how these standards can affect your product being available for sale on the market, we're going to take a look at a recent case study. So there are more and more cases of infringements of the CSAR being identified. This was witnessed last year when the NMPA announced on behalf of the Anhui Provincial Medical Products Administration that it was suspending the production and sales of the lavender essential oil manufactured by Jianshan Lake. The reason for the suspension was that the essential oil contained 2.5% vanilla butyl ether in its product formula, which exceeded the 1.5% allowed according to the inventory of existing cosmetic ingredients in China. And that by exceeding that 1.5%, it was considered harmful to human health as well as imposing a safety risk. So it meant that the product didn't comply with the cosmetic safety and technical standards that we've just looked at. Now, this led to the NMPA evoking Article 54 of the CSAR to suspend production, marketing, distribution, and sales when production can cause human injury or potential health risks. And there was another example in March 2022 when a cosmetics company legal representative was fined €5,500, but more importantly, was banned for 10 years from cosmetic production and operation activities. So they've got a 10-year wait now before they can undertake any cosmetics work in China. Another part of the cascading CSAR regulations in terms of quality and safety is the adverse reaction monitoring and reporting to ensure any unsafe products are recalled. So the measures for the management and monitoring of cosmetic adverse reaction came into play on the 1st of October last year. And then in December, some cascading supplementary guidelines were released. Now, these are currently in draft form, and these cover how to collect and report the adverse reaction. Basically, the NMPA expects companies to monitor and assess safety data on a regular basis and make decisions according to the overall risk profile. This requirement comes from the drug and the devices space, where there's a focus on post-market surveillance as well as research for improvement. Now, a part of the measures is the creation of a national cosmetic adverse reaction monitoring information system. This was launched at the same time. And within the guidelines now, there are forms and guidelines on how to complete the form and submit it to the monitoring system. There are specific requirements for the registrant and filer to establish an adverse reaction monitoring system. So obviously this mirrors the GMP requirements. But here in the measures, it specifies that you must have active collecting, reporting, analyzing, and evaluation of any adverse reactions, and that you must have provisions and procedures for product recall, as well as self-inspection and safety reassessments. And to facilitate the reporting of any adverse reactions, registrants and filers must provide public contact information. Now, in the draft guidelines, they must include phone numbers and emails, and that these on product labels as well as on official websites, and that these contact channels are open at all times, as in the phone numbers and emails, and that websites should also contain guidance on how to read the product label, together with reporting forms and reported methods about reporting an adverse event to you, the manufacturer. Now, any records that are established must be maintained for 3 years from the date of first being recorded. And in the draft guidelines, there is specific information that you must obtain in terms of the reporter must be an identifiable person. So you must obtain their surname, gender, and age, as well as that the adverse reaction is identifiable, together with information about it, as well as the cosmetics used. The registrant and filer should also provide training to all personnel on how to record an adverse reaction, because this can be made via the phone, email, social media, or other channels. and how to transfer that report to the relevant department for evaluation and within what time frame. And the time frame is important because it depends on the severity of the adverse reaction. So you need to perform a quick analysis of the adverse reaction that's reported, because there are 3 levels. General, these reactions need to be reported within 30 days of discovery. A serious reaction within 15 days of discovery. And this can be, for example, permanent hair loss, disfigurement, hospitalization, anaphylactic shock, etc. And then those that are considered to have greater social impact. These must be reported within 3 days. So a greater social impact is triggered when a serious reaction occurs over a large geographic area, or indeed for many people. So as you can see, staff need to be trained on how to report and to quickly report any adverse event or any reaction that is reported to the Quality and Safety Manager department. And finally, there are various types of inspections and checks that the authorities in China will undertake, such as the GMP inspection list for enforcing GMP requirements, as well as product sampling inspections, as well as customs clearance. So we'll take a look at these now. In advance of the GMP being implemented on the 1st of July last year, the NMPA issued a draft for comments of the inspection points and judgment principles. The final version came into force on the 1st of December last year, so it's just a couple of months old. Now, these inspection points are used to standardize the inspection work by the NMPA. The document contains a long list of criteria and inspection points, and it's split into 2 sections. Annex 1 for production, so the company who's actually undertaking the cosmetics manufacturing, whether it's the entrusted manufacturer or the registrant and filer who manufactures their own products. As well as Annex 2, which is for commissioned or entrusted production only, whereby registrants and filers are inspected to ensure they have systems in place to ensure that their outsourced manufacturer is fully compliant with the GMP. Now, of course, if a registrant and filer is engaged in both their own production and outsourced production, then both lists apply. There are 3 levels of importance, with critical items being denoted by 2 asterisks, key items by 1, and general items have none. A report is issued at the conclusion of any inspection, and there are 3 main outcomes of the inspection. Passed, which is what obviously everybody wants. It could be the case that you have failed, but you have been given the opportunity to rectify certain items within a given time frame, after which you're inspected again. Or it could be that the inspection fails due to serious issues, or that your rectification report is maybe not submitted on time, or some significant issues still remain, then the inspection will be a fail. Now, if the production is undertaken in China, then a production license will be revoked at this instance. And for importers, it may mean that products may no longer be imported into the country, and potentially those on sale being recalled. But what is considered non-compliance? Non-compliance is when you haven't implemented the measures or systems to comply with the GMP requirements. Defective compliance means you have established a system or procedure, but it doesn't fully comply and is therefore defective. So depending on the mix of these items and the scoring system, you may fail the inspection and be in regulatory violation. So this means that you've committed a prohibited act of not complying with the GMP provisions. So generally, it tends to be if you've got a mix of, if you're non-compliant with critical items, or you have a defective compliance of a critical item and defective or non-compliance of a combination of key and general items. So in terms of the actual inspections, the inspections for manufacturers, whether it's a registrant and filer or the outsourced manufacturer, the inspection guideline sets out 81 inspection points, of which 3 are critical, 26 are key items, and 52 are general. So in the draft version, 5 were actually considered critical, and this has now been reduced down to 3. Here you can see an example of one of the inspection points. So on the left you can see that the inspection point is number 49 and it's signalled with 2 asterisks. And this refers to Article 29, Paragraph 2 of the GMP. And you can see the content in the third column of the actual requirement of the GMP. And then in the final column, you can see the main points that the inspector is being instructed to check. So here, they're checking whether the enterprise has used prohibited raw materials, whether the enterprise uses restricted raw materials beyond the scope, such as with Jianshan Lake, which we saw earlier, and whether the raw materials, semi-finished goods, meet requirements, regulations, the national standards, as we've already looked at, as well as technical specifications. In terms of the non-manufacturing registrant and filer, being inspected separately to ensure that they are supervising their outsourced manufacturer, there are 24 inspection points in total. 3 were previously critical in the draft, and now that's only 1, which is the market release system. So you can see that the product release systems are integral to both the manufacturer and the entrusting party, so the registrant and filer. So it's a key point in the inspections for NMPA. There are 8 key items and 15 general items. And here you can see an example of inspection point number 19, which is denoted with 1 asterisk. So it's a key item referring to Article 58. Here are the contents of the GMP provision regarding establishing a product sales record system. And here are the main points that the NMPA inspector will be looking at to ensure that you have introduced a product sales record system, that you have registration certificate numbers, you're registering the use period, the quantity, the sales date, the price, contact information of the purchaser, and obviously to do with your shipping documents as well. So here you can see that it's a fairly comprehensive list of inspection points for both manufacturer and the registrant and filer. Now, another set of inspections are the sampling inspections, which were proposed in a draft for comments back in June last year. And the final version is just been recently published and will come into effect on the 1st of March. Now, sampling inspections already do take place in China, but this set of measures strengthens the whole process. And they have 8 chapters and 61 articles in total. And it calls for an annual sampling inspection plan, which will be coordinated at the national, provincial and city levels, and that they will be focusing on 6 categories of products. So children's cosmetics and special cosmetics, cosmetics containing new raw materials, cosmetics which have been subject to adverse reaction monitoring or complaints and reports in the past, cosmetics that have a relatively high failure rate of previous sampling inspections. Now, in these measures, it states that sampling records are retained by authorities for 6 years. So this can affect how often your product may be sampled. If it's already failed such sampling inspections in the past, you're likely to be re-inspected over a number of years. Cosmetics which have a wide circulation and a high frequency of use, as well as cosmetics which have high safety risks. But what does this mean when it comes to the actual inspections? Well, you won't be informed in advance about the sampling. And there are 2 locations for where the samples can be collected from, either on-site or online, which is going to be a simulated online shopping process. Now, these new measures state that manufacturers and distributors and economic operators, such as retailers, will receive a sample fee as reimbursement for the cost of the cosmetics being sampled. So typically this will be the factory price for manufacturers and the market price for distributors or retailers. And that any sample that's found to be abnormal will be subject to further investigation. Abnormal means that cosmetics are found not to have been filed or registered. They exceed the period of use i.e. they're on sale after shelf life has expired. No Chinese label is affixed, and the labeling content has prohibited items. So you're making claims, for example, that you're not allowed to. An inspection conclusion report will be issued by the inspecting agency, and this will obviously compare the product with national standards, specifications, and also the requirements that you have specified in your registration and filing materials. Any cosmetics that fail the sample have registrants and filers have 7 working days to submit an objection. Now, this can be done through your domestic responsible agent, and you can also submit a formal request for a reinspection subject to certain criteria and the fact that your power of attorney has been given to your domestic agent. Now, if these samples are found to endanger human health or there are serious risks, then the authorities can order manufacturers to stop production and recall the cosmetics that have been put on the market. And that's in accordance with Article 53 of the CSAR. Typically, this happens when products have prohibited raw materials in the samples that have been detected, or if microbiological test items of the sample product don't comply with the provisions and standards. And basically, if you do refuse to comply, the penalty could be that the registrant or filer will be prohibited for importing cosmetics for up to 10 years. And of course, the final step in getting the product into China has some quality requirements or checks that are undertaken at customs clearance. These relate to the measures for cosmetics labeling, which came into play in May 2022. So that any new product that is filed or registered from that date needs to follow the rules. Now, any product approved before May of last year, there's a grace period until May of this year when you have to make sure that your Chinese label conforms with the new regulation. It's advisable to take the following precautions for customs clearance because there are checks by customs staff. So you need to make sure that products are correctly labeled, that the batch number and the expiration date are printed on the outer packaging and the product itself, that you send the correct documentation for customs clearance, that the consignee is recorded as a domestic importer in the NMPA online account, and that your DRA has given power of attorney to them to use the filing and registration certificate for the importation. Random inspections will be conducted on Chinese labels and the quantity of goods, but there's sort of a low possibility at the moment of customs conducting sample testing on microorganisms, heavy metals, and pesticide residues. So what action do you need to take? If you are already supplying products to China, then you should already have started a gap analysis and adaptation to ensure you comply with the GMP and the adverse reaction requirements, which are already in force. And now you have 2 months to ensure that you comply with the quality and safety responsibility requirements and be ready for any possible sample inspections by ensuring labeling standards are fully met. And of course, if you're planning on supplying China in the coming year, it's also a good time to start preparing your gap analysis. So ideally, you'll be undertaking a gap analysis of your current system and procedures with those required by law in China for the GMP, the quality and safety responsibilities in terms of roles and duties and named personnel, adverse reaction collection and monitoring requirements, your safety ingredient information for registering and filing, as well as product labeling. Then you need to be looking at adapting. So adapting your current HR structure to Chinese requirements, so having the named quality and safety manager. And of course, updating your quality management system and SOPs to close any gaps, as well as drafting any separate SOPs for Chinese requirements if necessary, as well as working with your suppliers to ensure that they are also fully compliant. And finally, ideally undertake a mock inspection. Here, the idea is to make sure that you engage typically with a third party to undertake those mock inspections to check your readiness for NMPA GMP inspections, NMPA sample inspections, as well as NMPA quality and safety inspections. And by undertaking a mock inspection, it also helps identify any further gaps that you may not have filled in your gap analysis and adaptations so far. Now, typically in the medtech sector, there are up to 5 inspectors can be involved at the same time. So this is as much a logistics and interpretation exercise as well as going through the inspection itself. So it's good to have someone who's already had experience to be able basically take you through a mock inspection in advance of the real thing. And we already do know of NMPA inspections for overseas manufacturers as well as their contract manufacturers. So companies have already been notified of NMPA GMP inspections. And of course, there is the ongoing monitoring of the effectiveness of your compliance programs, as well as adapting to future Chinese legislation as more of it cascades down from the CSAR over the next couple of years. So in case you're wondering what help is available to you in adapting to the NMPA's requirements, at Cisema, we've been assisting companies for over 20 years doing just that. We've helped hundreds of companies seeking China manufacturing licenses, as well as in the medtech and pharma sector, which require overseas factory inspections. So our quality and compliance services cover factory inspections, so we can help you arrange pre-inspection meetings with the NMPA, accompany you and interpret during the inspection, obtain audit reports and lists of non-conformities, help you put into place the corrective measures and follow up with the NMPA for your final clearance. We also assist companies with designing and adapting the QMS and SOPs, such as undertaking a gap analysis of your existing documentation versus Chinese requirements, external audits, for example, to verify the implementation of relevant SOPs for yourself as a registrant and filer, as well as any outsourced manufacturer, as well as staff awareness training to be familiar with Chinese requirements and regulations. And in terms of regulatory affairs, we act as a domestic responsible agent for China, and as part of this service, we assist clients with customs clearance. We can, as a DRA, prepare and submit registrations and filing of cosmetic products as well as new cosmetic ingredients. And we also write product safety assessment reports for those registrations and filings, as well as working with nationally accredited laboratories to undertake final product and ingredient testing. And finally, we also prepare applications for the new cosmetic ingredient code on behalf of raw material suppliers. Great. Well, thank you for taking the time today. It was a rather speedy whistle-stop tour of all the quality and safety requirements. Please do get in touch if you do have queries regarding quality and safety for your cosmetics being manufactured or shipped to China for sale there. So we'd be very, very happy to help. Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. Have
Great.
a nice day,
Thanks.
afternoon, or evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.